Hello, everybody. Welcome to Heart Smart. I am so glad you are here for this program. I am excited. I can tell you this is one of my favorite classes to lead, overall programs to lead. So I welcome each and every one of you, no matter where you might be. If you're in Jacksonville, if you're in Gainesville, if you're in Central Florida, or if you're in the Himalayas, hey, good for your Wi-Fi reception out there if you're that far away. We are using this program to help lower the risk of heart disease. So every single component of this program is designed to help lower your risk of heart disease, but also talk about some of the simple steps that you can do to put yourself in a good position to succeed. My name is John. I am the manager of the Employee Wellness Program at UF Health Jacksonville. But as I said before, I know many of you might be joining us in regions outside of the Jacksonville area. So welcome. And today's class is going to talk all about habit formation, because when we look at methods to help improve our health and well-being, it really all begins with the habits that make up our day. So I think it's important to understand how they're formed, but also how we can replace maybe some not so optimal habits with habits that might put us in a better position for overall heart health. Every class that we have in this program is being recorded, so you can access later. We're also going to ask you to do homework after each class, and we use this as a two-pronged approach. We really want you to take this program seriously. That's one. But secondly, we also want to make sure we can track participation and really afford you some of the other benefits that come from joining this particular program in our employee wellness portfolio. So this agenda that many of you have seen already upon registration is an actual a hybrid approach to education. We've developed this program a few years ago, and through the pandemic, we learned that the virtual side of things makes it easier to get through to each and every person, but we also want to offer a hands-on approach too. So at the end of this program, you're going to be given the opportunity to meet one-on-one with a health coach to also talk about issues that might be specific to you in terms of your role in helping to minimize heart disease or lower the risk of heart disease. So the classes are set up 4 weeks in a row. So we'll have today's class. Next week, we'll be joined by our pharmacist with Gator Care, talking about medications. We'll have a class on nutrition and weight control that's led by one of our clinical dietitians, Olivia Sellers. And then lastly, we'll finish up with a talk on stress, depression, and heart disease. And this will be led by our Gator Care Wellness Coordinator, Gina Ganella. Now, what we also did through this curriculum is generate a couple of different virtual lessons. And these are things that you can kind of watch at your own leisure, if you will. I'll send you these video links after today's session, but they also cover some very important parts of heart disease prevention, including a little closer look at what the heart disease actually is. So that's led by our medical director, Dr. Mark McIntosh. We also have some input from our local YMCA about how to make fitness fun. And then I share with you a very brief lesson on setting SMART health goals and using SMART as an acronym for specific and measurable goals related to our health and well-being. So in terms of incentives, besides improved health and well-being, we also are awarding individuals who are in the Jacksonville Gator Care Plan 100 points towards your wellness credit. I'm also making available to each one of you a blood pressure monitor. Now, these blood pressure monitors can be picked up in Jacksonville at the Wellness Center or at Professional Park in Gainesville. So for those of you that are tuning in from Gainesville, I'm going to share with you an email address that'll be part of our follow-up email communication that will give you some details on how to access it. Now, again, it's not required to participate in this program. Some of you may already have a blood pressure monitor at home, but it's something that I think is important if we are looking at blood pressure health as a cornerstone for heart disease prevention. Want to afford you some opportunities to monitor it on a more frequent basis. And again, any adverse or abnormal results, we want to make sure you're communicating with your healthcare team too. We'll also be sending out cookbooks uh, when we talk about nutrition and weight control. So those will probably operate under the same guideline in terms of where to pick them up. But again, a couple of other additional incentives for participating in this program. Now, anytime you have questions, if you want to just drop it in the chat or unmute yourself, I'll try to answer it as best as I can. I know the virtual setting makes it somewhat difficult to really judge engagement, but I want you to just pretend like you're just sitting in a classroom, and if something doesn't make sense to you, just type it in that chat, unmute yourself, and we'll try to get those questions cleared up, because chances are, if you're thinking it, someone else is probably thinking it too. So to get started here, there's going to be some self-reflection needed. You've signed up for this program, and perhaps maybe you've been told you've had high cholesterol, or maybe you have a family history of heart disease, or your blood pressure is a little bit high, or your weight is not where you'd like for it to be. And you say, you know what, I want to do something about this. But when we talk about habit formation, it all comes back to making sure these changes you're trying to make are going to stick. And it comes back to asking yourself, what's most important to you? So you don't have to answer this right away, but these are some questions you need to be asking yourself. Like, what things are most important to you? Is it time with family and friends? Is it the ability to chase around grandkids? Or is it, what is it that's most important to you? And what do you want most in life? It's a very deep question, I know, but everything that you do, every behavior that you're engaged in should match these long-term goals and objectives if we want it to maintain, if we want it to stick. If you are trying to improve your cholesterol, lower your blood pressure, how does your behavior fit in with your goals and your values? And again, it all falls back on what is the most important thing to you. And if you want to feel stronger when going up a flight of stairs, or be more active and be able to walk a 5K, whatever it is, every behavior that you do, if it's fitting with these goals and values, is going to make it more easy to sustain. Now, I'm going to take a little unofficial straw poll. I'm going to see how many of you can come up with some examples here. So feel free to type it in the chat. So you tell me, what are some examples of unhealthy behaviors? Give you a few moments to type some things in here. This is my way to say, okay, are you paying attention to what we're doing right now? Give me some ideas. What are some examples of unhealthy behaviors? Eating on the go. Thanks, Earl. Eating some high salt foods. Thank you, Andrea. Snacking in front of the TV. I think I just did that yesterday, so I'm guilty as charged. Processed foods, sedentary lifestyle, fried foods, not exercising, not moving up. Very good. So yeah, when we look at unhealthy behaviors, the list goes on and on. I typed up a few myself: too much sitting, overspending ourselves, eating out too much, over consuming alcohol, grazing on processed foods, overusing our electronic devices, doom scrolling, as they say. The list goes on. But more importantly, why do we engage in these behaviors? If we all know they're unhealthy, you type them all out, you know they're unhealthy, and as I said, I'm guilty of one or two of these, and maybe yourself are guilty of one of the items that you just typed. Why do we do it? Why are we engaging in behaviors that we know are unhealthy? Why would I grab a bag of Cheetos when I know, as a registered dietitian, that an apple might be more nutritious? And again, this is where we get to the root of the issue. And when we look at habit formation, we have to take a close look at what are some of the root causes. And a lot of times when we look at some of these decisions that were being made, they're built on patterns that we grew up with. Maybe we are associating the hearty plate of mac and cheese with feelings of comfort around our childhood. So these ingrained patterns are part of our personal DNA. Maybe it's because of social pressures. Well, hey, everyone else is going out for a beer. I should probably join them. Maybe it's because of the type of food that we're selecting is biologically designed to really not be underconsumed. What I mean by that, these ultra processed foods, there's something going on when we look at how these are designed. These manufacturers know what they're doing. They're using the right combination of salt, fat, and sugar to really make it extremely difficult to eat just a moderate amount. So that's part of the issue. And then maybe sometimes we're overcome by feelings of self-sabotage. Like, oh, you know what? I'm never going to lose weight, or I'm never going to be able to eat healthy. So why even bother? So this cyclical self-sabotage can make sustaining these unhealthy behaviors a little bit more evident. And then last but not least, stress and anxiety. So when we look at what happens in our brains and what happens, how we feel after we eat some of these unhealthier foods or after we engage in some of these unhealthy behaviors, usually the root cause is because of stress and anxiety. And that temporarily can give us a feeling of pleasure, but ultimately is not going to put us in a good position to lower our risk of heart disease. So many of those behaviors that you mentioned that are unhealthy, we know run counterintuitive to preventing heart disease. And that's what we're talking about today, trying to make sure we're setting the framework for habit formation that can help lower the risk of heart disease. And we know why it's difficult to change habits. Sometimes we just aim too high, trying to hit a home run each time you step up to the plate. Let's say, you know what? I'm not very active. I want to train to run a marathon. Well, that might be too high of a goal. Maybe your first step would be just getting off of the couch and going for a walk after dinner each night. So aiming a little bit lower or setting smaller goals going to make the habit easier to attain. And again, this can in turn build confidence as you start to build on these smaller habits as you approach your larger goals. And the other thing that I see a lot, so as I mentioned before, in addition to managing the wellness program, I got my training as a registered dietitian. So I've got a lot of training in nutrition counseling. And what I see a lot of times is people will focus more on their outcomes rather than the system and how to get there. And what I mean by that, quite frequently, I might talk to someone, you know what, John, I want to lose 30 pounds. Okay, well, let's talk about that. Why do you want to lose 30 pounds? And let's look at some of the behaviors around weight loss that can help you get there. So we're instead focusing on the system and not the outcome. So the system would mean maybe dining out less frequently or cutting back on sugar sweetened beverage consumption or swapping that bag of Cheetos for that apple when it's time for that afternoon snack. So looking at the system that's set up, looking at the environment, which is the invisible hand that shapes behavior, rather than the outcome, is usually what I try to advocate for. Yes, losing some weight might be beneficial for heart disease prevention, but if we focus more on the behaviors, that weight loss, if necessary, can take care of itself. And that's usually where I like to start when we talk about counseling for helping change some of these habits. I'm going to share with you some excerpts from a couple of pretty popular books that are out there. And some of you may have come across these in your own personal development. One of them is called The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, and another one's called Atomic Habits by James Clear. So each of these individuals promote different frameworks for habit formation and how to engineer yourself to kind of not really change the actual habit, but replace it with something different. And it all comes down to understanding the loop around habit formation. Typically, there's going to be a cue. All right. So the cue could be, well, it's lunchtime. So it's 12 o'clock. So it's time to go get lunch. So your routine, walk to the cafeteria, get something to eat, and your reward is you're less hungry. So you can use this same logic when we talk about understanding some of our unhealthier habits and see, okay, well, I know that the routine I'm currently doing is not sustainable for heart health. What can I do differently? So here's an example. So let's say after a anguishing day at work, where we're, maybe having exposure to a little bit more stress and anxiety that we're feeling comfortable with, our routine is to have a drink. And we know alcohol consumption on a frequent basis could put me at risk for heart disease issues, but it helps me feel a little bit better. So the secret here is understanding, okay, what is the cue? What is the trigger that's driving this behavior? And how can I develop a new routine that'll give me that same feeling? So the cue here would be workplace stress and my craving for relief. So the routine is to have some alcohol and I feel a little bit better. But what about if I just talk to somebody? Do I still feel better? Chances are you might. So again, that's what we look at. You're never going to really eliminate the habit itself or eliminate the cue in some instances, but you can replace the routine. And this comes through a lot of trial and error. So a lot of times when we look at the root cause of some of those behavior choices being stress and anxiety, we have to try to assess, okay, what are some different routines that I can engage in that'll still give me that same relief from that source of anxiety? And then taking it a step further, what can I do to maybe help minimize the root cause of that stress and anxiety? And this is where we look at, talking with your supervisors or your employees, or looking at your schedule and time management. So there's lots of other additional resources we can dovetail from that. But it all begins with trying to experiment with some different routines that'll give you that same reward. And again, it's all trial and error because only you know how that specific routine will make you feel. Maybe talking to somebody didn't really help you feel any better. So this is where maybe going for a walk around the block or taking some time off for one day of self-care, that can give you that reward that you're looking for without being so detrimental to our cardiovascular health. Another approach, and again, very similar to the power of habit, was uncovered in James's Clear Atomic Habits. So he has a little bit different perspective where you're still dealing with a cue, a trigger, and some type of routine, and then achieving some type of reward. So what he is suggesting is looking at your environment and seeing how you could design it so you're trying to minimize some of those cues that are maybe less healthy, and see what we can do to engineer it a little bit differently. So some examples here: well, you wake up, you want to feel alert when you get up, so you drink a cup of coffee, so you satisfy your craving to feel alert. Drinking coffee becomes associated with waking up. So again, nothing too problematic here in terms of health and well-being when we talk about drinking coffee. But let's say, you know what, trying to eat better, but I smell a donut shop as I walk down the street near my office, then I begin to crave that donut because it was right there. So you buy the donut and eat it. So what you do now is you're associating buying that donut with walking down the street near your office. But if that particular behavior is interfering with what you want to be, what's most important to you, you might need to design your environment so you're not walking right by the donut shop as you go to your office. So again, it's all about trying to assess the environment that you're exposing yourself to, because I will tell you this, a lot of times when I talk to people, they'll give me this common theme, and maybe you yourself could agree with this. And they say, John, you know what? I don't have the willpower. Raise your hand if you feel you don't have the willpower sometimes, or if that's a statement that's crossed your mind. Chances are at least one, two, or maybe many of you have felt that way. You don't have the willpower. But let me tell you something. Willpower is a myth. Okay, we all have it. We've all achieved great things at some point in our life. And what I can tell you about willpower, the less you have to use it, the stronger it can become. And that's what I mean by trying to look at your environment. Because if you're exposing yourself to some of those hyper palatable foods or those very tempting situations, it's going to be difficult to continue to resist. So again, we want to look at the environment when we talk about shaping some of our habits. And probably one of the best real life examples of this is the smoke-free workplace. Okay, so we'll talk about that in a minute here. So when we look at trying to change some of our habits, one of the things to ask yourself here is, how can I make it obvious? How can I make it attractive? How can I make it easy? And how can I make it satisfying? So let's say one of the habits you're trying to change is your sedentary lifestyle. So, okay, well, how can I make it more obvious to me to get off the couch? Well, maybe you set aside a bag with a pair of shorts, t-shirt, and sneakers that you take with you to work, and you can change into that right after you get off work and go for that walk. How can I make it attractive? Well, let's say maybe you're finding that you walk in a shaded area or a wooded area or a more scenic area, that will make it a little bit more enticing to you. So maybe choose your destination a little bit more carefully. How can you make it easy? Well, see how close you can be to one of those areas that you find most attractive, and how can you make it satisfying? Maybe you go with a friend or ask a colleague or a family member to join you. So this is what I mean by looking at how we can minimize some of those barriers to make that behavior a little bit more obvious to you. And you could also flip it on the backside or flip it around if you're trying to stop some of the unhealthier habits. So how can you make it less obvious, less attractive, and less easy? So I noticed just the other day, we were having a event for heart health, and obviously there's an idea here that dark chocolate is correlated with some mostly overstated benefits for heart health, but we still had some dark chocolate that we had at our information table, and just to help draw people in and share some information, just a very small piece of dark chocolate. But I noticed I had the bag on my desk, and every time I looked at it, I found myself putting my hand in there. So in order to make it less obvious, I had to take that bag and put it on the other side of the office so I wouldn't be tempted by that type of food choice. So again, looking at ways to structure your environment so that healthier habit is going to be easier to attain. So when we look at that environment, and I mentioned before about one of the most widespread examples of how the environment can impact our habits is the advent of the smoke-free workplace. So all of us, most of us, I would say, work in or around a hospital environment. We're all in a smoke-free workplace. And what we found with this is that we see lower cigarette consumption from continuing smokers. We see reduced prevalence of smoking. And when we look at it together, the effects of people stopping smoking and reducing consumption dropped cigarette consumption by 29%. So again, these were smokers who are now in a smoke-free workplace, and some of them ultimately were quitting in this study, but we saw overall cigarette consumption drop by nearly 30%. So look at this logic in terms of how the environment is the invisible hand here shaping your behavior, and see how it can work for you too when we talk about being physically active, eating healthier foods, managing stress and anxiety, and see how your environment can help set that up. Hopefully everyone's still with me. I want to talk a little bit about the stages of change, and then I'm going to dive into a little bit more detail about your homework assignment, because historically we've used this class as a springboard to the remaining sessions as I outlined before. And each session we'd have a little quiz, and the quiz would be just simple questions about some of the content that was covered here. But what I want to do this go round is instead make sure that this lesson is sticking with you. So the follow-up quiz to this particular class is going to ask you what behaviors you are trying to change, what changes you want to make, why you want to change it, who's going to help you change it, and how are you going to know if your plan is working. So again, that's going to be the follow-up assignment to today's class. But before we dive into that, again, you can do this at your own time when we're after the class, but let's look at the stages of change. So chances are at some point in your career, you've heard of this, stages of change. We all kind of go through these stages when we are trying to figure out what we're trying to achieve and how we're going to get there. So we're thinking about it. We're maybe, okay, well, maybe I do need to do something. So we're contemplating it, and then we're making preparation to make that change, and we're putting it into action. The good news is, if you're in this class right now, you're already here at the preparation stage, okay? But before we get there, let's take a look at each stage of change, because psychologists say we move through these stages in order to make this change, and it's a cycle. So it will repeat itself, and there's going to be times where we relapse, and that's inevitable, but we want to learn from that relapse and move forward as we can continue to make these changes. So here's some examples of pre-contemplation. Again, this wouldn't really be anyone in this class because we already arrived at the fact that we're beyond pre-contemplation, but this is where you're like, you know what? These issues don't even affect me. I've tried so many times to lose weight. It's hopeless. High cholesterol runs in the family. There's nothing I can do. How do we manage pre-contemplation? Maybe this affects a family member or a friend of yours. So to move forward, they must realize that that behavior conflicts with those personal goals that I had you outline. So the next stage, contemplation. So you know what? maybe I am thinking about it. I just don't have the time to exercise. And or look, I know it's good for me, but when I'm stressed out, I really need some sugar. So for this stage, what I typically recommend and what psychologists will recommend is look at the pros and cons of this lifestyle change and how you could overcome those barriers or those particular cons. So I'll give you an example here. It might be difficult to read this depending on the size of your screen, but again, this will be sent out to you as well after the class, all the different slides here. But here's some examples of some pros and cons for making healthy food choices and getting more physical activity. These are some of the more commonly held habits that we associate with heart health. So again, looking at your own personal ledger, what your pros and cons might be for a specific change and what you can do about getting through some of those obstacles and moving through some of those cons and overcoming those barriers so you're not going to run into problems when it comes to continuing to move forward. When you're there, well, this is where you create an action plan with achievable goals. And this is where our brief lesson on SMART goals can be helpful to you. So in that follow-up email that comes out, look closely at that SMART goal mini lesson that I put together. And this will give you some ideas on what those goals should look like, because we want them to be specific and measurable, as well as achievable, relevant, and time bound. So let's look at some of these barriers to healthy habits. And I shared some that I hear a lot of. I talked about the willpower myth. Maybe you don't have the time, or you don't like the taste of healthier foods, or you feel like you can't do it alone, or you don't like physical activity, or the healthier eating is more expensive, or you don't know what to eat. Understanding what these barriers are and developing a plan through those barriers is going to increase your likelihood of success. So look at it on a case-by-case basis. Well, maybe, you know what, I don't know what to eat. Well, guess what? We offer a registered dietitian for every person on this call that can walk you through each of those issues when it comes to not knowing what to eat. I don't like physical activity. Well, what are activities that you enjoy doing that don't require sitting? Because when we look at physical activity, it's not just joining a gym, going to an exercise class. It's about getting up and moving around. So finding things that keep you walking and upright and moving, getting those limbs moving, are going to be things that we can sustain if you enjoy those particular movements. Can't do it alone? Well, maybe there's a support person in place that can help you. So again, there are ways to get through each and every barrier, but understanding what they might be ahead of time is going to increase your likelihood of success. Excuse me, I had to get through that there. Hopefully everyone's still doing okay. If you do have questions, again, just type them away. I'm here to help. Finishing up on the stages of change, again, the action stage. You made the change and you're tracking progress, you're getting support, you're rewarding yourself for a job well done. But I think when we look at this particular stage where you're making these changes, you're eating healthy, you're getting more activity, you're managing the stress, you're dealing with some of the issues about being mindful of taking medication. This is where tracking progress can be very helpful to kind of reiterate some of this change. So activity journals, food diaries, weight logs, medication logs, each of these can be a good way to kind of assess your progress and keep you on the right track. And that's where we arrive at the new me. This is the maintenance phase. You've been practicing this behavior for anywhere from 3 to 6 months, and this is kind of the baseline now. And this is the new you, so to speak. But when we look at the stages of change, again, just like we said before, it all comes back to a relapse. So when we look at triggers of some of those old habits, whether it's a stressful day or walking by the donut shop or going to a happy hour, we have to figure out how can we avoid some of those triggers to minimize the opportunities to relapse, because it's going to happen. What we do when we look at relapse is understand it's part of the process, just like we see right here. But how can I learn from that particular setback? What needs to happen to get back into action? And how do you want to treat yourself while working towards change? And a lot of times, this is an opportunity where you can treat yourself with more kindness and less self-sabotage. Oftentimes during that relapse, like, oh, well, I'm a failure. I'm never going to get this right. I'm never going to be active like I want to be or be able to eat healthy. Well, again, if you replace some of those negative feelings with more positive, this can help you work towards those sustained improvements. And this is where health coaching and social support can help you through that process, which are things that we offer in employee wellness, no matter where you are in Jacksonville, Gainesville, Central Florida, and beyond. So, is it time for a change? What do you think? I mean, ask yourself these questions here. Is this behavior important to you? Would you be healthier, better off if you changed the behavior? Would changing this behavior move you out of your comfort zone, but still within a little bit of reach? Is your goal clear and specific? Is your goal something you can count or measure? If you're answering yes, then I guess what? It's time for a change. Okay. If you're answering no, well, then we're not quite at the phase yet for that stage of change to occur for you. And again, when we look at opportunities to move forward, health coaching can help you realize what simple steps you can take to maybe navigate through some of those current barriers that exist to help you reach that goal. And when we look at making some of these changes stick, I always try to say you should start small. Focus on one behavior change goal at a time, not losing weight, being more active, eating healthier, managing stress. Taking on too much at once is going to create an opportunity for more self-sabotage. So choose one behavior. Try to focus on behaviors you have full control over. What I mean by that is sometimes you can't control all of the stress and anxiety that life throws at you. So try to focus on behaviors you have full control over, or your response to some of those cues and how you manage and respond to some of that stress or the stressors in your life, and make sure you're properly motivated to provoke that change. And what that does is fall back to that first question I had for you, and that is, what's most important to you? Because if you're looking at a behavior or an ultimate goal that's not really that important to you, you're not going to change. Okay. And that's okay. That's part of the self-reflection process. But again, give it time, look for some outside support, and look closely at your environment. Is it putting you in a position to succeed, or is it making it more difficult to make those changes? Because again, the willpower can become stronger the less we have to use it. So it's kind of the opposite of a muscle. All right, so that is it for today in terms of our content. If you have any questions, drop them in the chat. I've got a link on your screen for today's assignment. So again, this assignment may take a few minutes to complete. It's all about really trying to put into writing what changes you're trying to make and the reason you're making these changes. This is an online survey that'll just be shared with me. Okay, you're going to put your name on it. It's going to have your employee ID, some other identifiers, so we can kind of track who's participating in this particular program. But it is confidential. And again, it's really just about helping you understand what specific things or thing do you want to change moving forward, and why you want to change it, and the steps you plan to take, and what might interfere with your plan. Because if you're putting it into writing, you're making it real. A lot of times we'll attend classes on habit formation and workshops, and after the class, like, oh, that was great, now let's go get some cheeseburgers. Well, what I want you to do now is actually give some thought to what you want to achieve in this program, because a lot of the things that we're talking about in this program, whether it's nutrition, whether it's physical activity, whether it's medication, are going to help you lower that risk of heart disease. But again, I just want to make sure you have the right support to move forward. And if you do need help, if you do need some health coaching, reach out to our offices and we'll be sure to get you connected with that. And again, we want to really help move you forward through this. All right, so thank you very much. I'll leave this screen up for you, and I'll be hanging out in the chat. If there are any questions, you can type them in there to the whole crowd or just to me, and I will see you next week. So next week, we'll be joined by Rachel Carloni, as I said before, our Gator Care pharmacist. So we hope you'll tune into that. And as I said before, even if there are classes that you find yourself you're not going to be able to attend, you'll find the links on our website and in each class's follow-up email. Thank you.